Reverend Doctor.
And then it all went silent when we hear that magic little computerized voice. Well, thanks everybody for being here tonight. Grateful to have you here. This is going to be a good and interesting trip through what's almost the end of the book of Acts. We'll be here at the end of 26 and go into then chapter 27 tonight. And let's open with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you bring us together once more to study your word. As we find ourselves running towards a conclusion that we have known would come for many weeks, we ask that you would help us yet see and learn from the story of Paul, that even though we know in all things you control all things and work them for the good of those who love you, yet in the midst of the storm, it can feel overwhelming. And so we thank you that you have given us your Son, that we might have peace even in the midst of chaos and storm. We ask you bless us tonight with your Holy Spirit, that he would lead us in wisdom. We ask this in the name of Christ Jesus the Lord. Amen. All right. So when we last left off, we had Paul being as big and boisterous and as proficient a public speaker as he could be in front of the governor of the Palestine area, the Roman governor Festus, and the Jewish king Agrippa and his sister Bernice. And so he was speaking particularly to King Agrippa, and we saw him kind of laying out the faith, being reprimanded a little bit, saying that he's, just thinking way too hard about this by Festus. But we pick up, right near the end of Paul's speech, having laid out his trust to the prophets, having laid out the resurrection, he now asks King Agrippa this question. This is verse 27. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. Now, this is the horns of a dilemma, because either the good king here, who may or may not have been sleeping with his sister, and certainly is less than pure as the driven snow, says, yes, I believe the prophets, which would mean he believes in the resurrection of the dead, and then that Christ is the fulfillment of that, right? So Paul would then have the question of, then why don't you believe in Jesus, of which I'm now on trial? And if he answers, no, I don't believe the prophets, well, at this point, he's in breach then of the Jewish faith in its entirety, no longer believing the word of God at all. And he would be equally reprimanded, hence the two horns upon which he sits here. So, but Agrippa shows us just what it means to be a politician, because Agrippa finds this immediately. And this is his answer to Paul. Agrippa said to Paul, in a short time, you would persuade me to be a Christian? He knows exactly what the issue is, and he refuses to answer the question by posing his own problem, right? And the answer is yes, Paul is trying to persuade him to be a Christian, absolutely. But he uses it here to get himself off the horns by not answering the question. And Paul then 29 says, whether short or long, I would to God, not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains. And then the king arose, and the governor and Bernice and those who were with him, who were sitting with them. And when they had withdrawn, they said to one another, this man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. And Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. And that's the end of the chapter there. So, what do you think about the way that the speech wraps up here? Should you end a speech with a question?
Well, it's interesting that he does say, yes, I do want you to become a Christian. I want everybody that hears me to believe.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, that's what he's been trying to do, even though he's now on trial for it.
Mhm. And Paul understands that even though he is in a legal setting, it is still, right, even though he's in a political setting, I should say, it is still a place for the Christian truth to dominate. And that even though it may feel like this is a place where he should be making arguments according to the law of the Romans, he is assured that even that is not as important as the profession of the Christian faith, and that the faith that we have and that we hold it would actually dictate then how we would understand or how we would interact with the law. So Paul's goal here, whether is not, political, so to speak, but it's always theological, even though he's in a political setting. This is a fairly good kind of rule of thumb, I would argue, for Christians as well, to realize that whatever setting we are in, whether it is predominantly one of business or of education or of politics, that we are still primarily Christian. That is our first vocation. And so while we may be able to or must speak in those kind of arenas, we still speak with the centrality of the Christian faith. And that can be really hard to do because most of the time the public arenas, just like this one, don't want to hear about Jesus and don't want to hear that we are trying to make religious arguments, particularly to convert people.
Does Paul feel pretty safe here because he's already appealed to Caesar?
Yeah, absolutely.
And does Agrippa offer him any danger anyway, or is he?
He could have if Festus wanted to kind of hand him off and just say, if Paul hadn't appealed to Caesar, and so it was assumed that if Paul hadn't appealed to Caesar, Festus, if he didn't want to deal with him, could have said, "There's nothing here Roman. So if you want to deal with him according to the Jewish law, go ahead. You're kind of a Jewish authority," and given him permission to do so. But he had appealed to Caesar. And so in the end, it really does become a question of will he add anything to the argument that Festus is going to present before Caesar or not. And to that end, I don't know that he is really adding anything, other than to say, Caesar, this is really more of a theological issue, but Paul appealed to you. So Festus really doesn't get a good, solid, this is what he did wrong out of it. Instead, he gets exactly what he didn't want, which was if he hadn't invoked this, right? If you didn't, once you make your bed, you got to stay in it. And so if he hadn't done that, he would have been free. And so it's out of their hands. That's really how they look at it. Okay. So yeah, so Paul's not worried about whether it's long or short, whether he has a long time to convert somebody or a short time. He's going to speak the truth, and he's going to do so always with the intent of convincing people of the truth of Jesus Christ, which is a good thing. And if you want to venture particularly into the realm of politics, that is a fine way to do it, to always speak when it comes to politics with the idea and the intention of whether long or short, our goal is to convert, right? Our goal is to share the gospel. It helps temper some of the things we otherwise might say. All right, good. Anything else out of this? All right. Onward to 27 we go. So Paul had appealed to Caesar, and so Caesar he has to go to. So Luke doesn't tell us that we exit the courtroom, but just kind of scene ends, new scene opens here in 27, and the new scene is this. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. Now, at first glance, this sentence just seems like something that a high school student would write to give you a little bit of intro, and off we go. But there's a few things we want to pull out of this. First, that pesky we has shown up again. And so who's there?
He's Luke, right?
Yeah, Luke has shown up once more. Luke is always kind of around, certainly during the imprisonment. This is the time I believe that Luke has done most of his research for the gospel. And then when it is decided here that Paul is going to set sail for Italy, which would seem to be several days or even perhaps a week or month later, we don't have an exact time frame. Then, Luke is called for and Luke goes with Paul. One of the reasons for these prisoners to have more than just a centurion, but have some kind of an entourage, is that while Rome is responsible for getting the prisoners to Rome, they are not responsible for feeding said prisoners on their way to Rome. Okay, you have to take care of yourself. Yes, so there is a political and a cost to using that political power. So that's the first thing. So they're going to set sail for Italy. Go ahead, Jeff.
What was it that you said again that the centurion belonged to? Because in the NIV it says the Imperial Regiment, which sounds Star Warish.
Yes, yeah. They should. Dun 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 dun.
Yeah, you had different.
All right. Yeah, I had Augustine cohort. Let me just pull up that passage here. My handy dandy Bible works behind the screen here. Oh, I don't have the NIV on there. Give me 1 second here as I take a look at this. I'm just wondering why the NIV would choose to translate it that way. The Imperial Regiment. That's okay. Okay. All right. I can see what they're doing, but it's an odd thing to kind of pull out. So in the Greek that lies behind here, there's the word seperes. Seperes means cohort. Okay, so it's a certain group of soldiers. But then you have a different word, and it's a very odd word. It's Sebastios. Okay, or Sebastos, excuse me, where you get Sebastian from. Right? Have you ever heard the name Sebastian, like under the sea? Okay, it means revered or august, which is in Latin would be Augustus. And so it's the revered cohort, or the reason the NIV is they're just trying to get you to realize that Augustine is the emperor's guard, basically. And so emperor, imperial, therefore imperial regiment. That's kind of how they get there. It's an odd thing that they wouldn't just go cohort or imperial cohort or something if they wanted to go that way. But yeah, good question, Jeff. Got to get into the Greek. Wonderful. And you got to learn about Sebastian. All right, back to the text here, or other parts of the text. So they want to sail for Italy. They are in Palestine. And so you've got to go kind of you're going to go along the northern edge of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, in the Mediterranean, I know we don't really think about the Mediterranean other than that you can take cruises on it and it's wonderful beaches and things. There is some nasty weather in the Mediterranean Sea, particularly in the winter months. All right, so as winter comes, the Mediterranean Sea, particularly in the ancient world, becomes unpassable. All right, you are taking your life in your hands. Think, when Odysseus has the sea god Poseidon decide that he ain't going home. That's the kind of storms that crop up as winter comes. Most ships will winter somewhere, and then when the storms have settled, they will go out in the spring. All right, so I let you know that because they're going to try and do some winter sailing here. At least a little bit. So they're going to have to set sail for Italy. It's going to be a little bit of a longer journey. They are delivered to a centurion of this imperial regiment, or this Augustan cohort, named Julius. Now, this certainly seems, just like, oh, we get an introduction, to be given a singular name, Julius, gives us an idea that this is an older soldier, because the simple nomen, or the use of a singular name, is actually outlawed by Claudius, who happens, kind of in the 40s, 50s AD. So it appears that, at least from the scholarship that's been done on this, that this centurion was made a citizen during Julius Caesar's reign. So kind of right around the birth of Christ. And then thus he takes the name Julius and gets a singular name. So we have an older, which should be wiser, hopefully, soldier kind of in charge of these sailors. We're just trying to give you an idea of what this gentleman may be like, because we'll have some interactions with him. And having that little bit of background may be helpful as we think about why he makes some of the choices he makes. All right. So, verse 2, and embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, and I forgot where this is, that little city. It's a city somewhere, and I just don't remember where it is off the top of my head. But embarking in a ship from there, which was about to set sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, for us that means Turkey, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. This seems to be a co-worker of Paul's, so this would be a Greek, right? Maybe even one of the Greeks that he got in trouble for having in Jerusalem, even though he didn't bring him into the temple. But we can see here that Paul is traveling and is still teaching, right? Teaching Gentiles particularly. So they're heading out to the courts of Asia. The next day they put in at Sidon. So you go Caesarea, you go up to the port in Sidon, and then you're going to go up towards Asia, again, staying near the coast. Primarily, these ships that Paul's on. They vary in size. We'll see actually a fairly large ship here shortly, but they're going to take ships. The Roman Empire didn't necessarily have a dedicated navy for prisoners. Okay, there's no like prison ships running to and fro different parts of the nation. What they did is the centurion, under imperial law, was able to basically commandeer space. So they would just say, hey, where are you going? And they would, hitchhike, so to speak, across the empire to get where they needed to go with the prisoners. So that's why you might go to one city, wait there a little while till they found another ship going to another port, and so on and so forth. So these are not direct journeys in any shape. They are always going to be kind of stop, go, stop, go. All right, so the next day they put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and to be cared for. Everybody knows that Paul's not a threat in the Roman side. They know that he appealed to Caesar, and they probably have the story. So they're not really worried about him. Yes, he's under arrest, quote unquote, because he has to go to Caesar, but he's not under arrest like bound and gagged in the ship's hold. Okay, he can walk around. He's free to talk to people. The centurions, we see this here. We'll actually see this in Rome as well, that Paul is able to go and visit people or have people over. And, they expect that Paul will not run away. All right, good. So putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. This is our first clue that's not, we're heading a little bit towards bad sailing season. Again, kind of good sailing season is really March to September. Once you start getting out of that, it gets a little wonky.
Okay.
It gets really wonky, actually, not even a little bit. When we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Sicilia and Pamphylia, again, those are sections of what is modern day Turkey. We came to Myra in Lycia, so getting nearer towards Greece now. And the centurion found a ship of Alexandria, that's Egypt, sailing for Italy, and put us on board. Right, so they get to they're taking one ship, and that ship kind of makes a few stops and then is not going where they need to go. So they get off in Lycia, and now the centurion has to find another ship. You can just imagine this, right? That he's just you got this big Roman centurion, all guarded up, and he's just going door to door at the docks. Where are you going? Do you have any room? You go to Rome. So Romans could compel people to do certain things, like carry their armor and their goods for 1 mile. They couldn't compel them to go further than that. They could not compel them to, they had power, but they couldn't compel a ship captain to go to Rome. So they had to look for someone who was already going there. So they find one from Alexandria. We don't know, maybe there's papyrus on board. Well, we know there's going to be grain on board in one of these ships, but not quite sure what's all in all the ships. Various things, just trade of the Roman Empire going on. I see a question. Did I miss something? No, just making sure. Okay. So 7, we sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty at Cnidus. Cnidus, there we go. As the wind did not allow us to go further, and we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salome. And coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called the Fair Havens, which is near the city of Lasea. And much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous, because even the fast was already over. And so Paul advised them, saying, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ships, but of our lives." But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. All right. I would too. Paul has no sailing expertise. He is a tent maker. Paul is not a sailor. Most of the people in the ancient world can't swim. Okay. I know we tend to get our kids to learn to at least, not drown in the water, if not do something more than that. But in the ancient world, you did not swim. And the Israelites particularly never swam. There was one navy in all of Israel's history. Solomon built it, and the Lord sunk it, and they never went back on a ship, at least not willingly. So Israelites don't know how to swim, just kind of as a rule. So here you have a land-loving, Jew who's trying to tell the centurion, we can't go out there. And you have a business owner who's been sailing for 30 years who says, I can make that trip. And I'm going to make that trip. Who are you going to trust? The crazy, religious guy walking around with a sandwich board and talking about this Jesus resurrection thing, or the perfectly normal ship captain who's allowing you to transport, prisoners? You're probably going to go with the normal guy. So we don't begrudge the soldier here. Again, he's trying to use wisdom. And from the way of the world, this certainly seems very, very wise, right? That you listen to this ship captain. But Paul at least has a passing knowledge, because he knows that the fast, this would be the fast of Pentecost. Excuse me, it's not the fast of Pentecost. I believe it's the fast of Yom Kippur. It's later on. It's the September fast. It's the Day of Atonement fast. That's kind of the closest Jewish marking to when the storm season would begin. The Jews may have remembered that after their navy got destroyed, from wind and water on water. No one destroyed their navy. God just directed in weather. So it's later on. It's in September at least. So that fast had passed, and so Paul knows that, at least from friends or maybe from his own personal experience a little bit, that there is no good sailing weather here. But the captain thought they could. So the centurion pays more attention to the pilot than to what Paul has to say. We'll see if that holds true later on. So verse 12. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there, and on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both the southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. So the winter is there. The ship captain knows they're not going to make it to Rome, but his goal is to make it to the island of Crete, because the docks that they were at weren't going to be sufficient. City size probably not big enough, but certainly the berthing of these boats is not going to be sufficient as weather would come in. These boats would be knocked up and down, the waves could damage the boat, lose the cargo, things of that nature. So that's what they're kind of worried about. You got to have a place that you can, the old harbors used to be places that were, protected, at least, kind of almost like a cove, right? Where you had protection from at least two directions, if not three directions, from wind and waves. So that's what they're looking for. So they're going to try and make a go of it. Try and beat the odds and the weather. How could this go poorly?
So many ways.
I know. We all read it and go, this is just a bad idea. Like, just lump it up and deal with it. But this ship, as we'll see, is already loaded with cargo. And so that's what really puts the owner here needing to move. Go ahead, Linda.
But it sounds like they weren't planning on making it to Rome anyway. He was like, well, we'll just winter over in Crete. So this journey that should have taken Paul, what, I don't know, a week or two to get to Rome is now going to be several months because they got a winter in Crete.
Yeah, it probably would take closer to like a month or so of sailing, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe 6 weeks, depending on it. They're not moving very fast. They're kind of going island to island and things. But yeah, now you're talking like 3, 4, 5 months.
Yeah.
Yep. Could have walked there. Again, yeah, they're not trying to get to Rome, but they are trying to get to safe harbor. That's real. That's kind of the important thing. As we'll see, this ship is going to be filled with grain. Okay. Now, when we think of a ship filled with grain, right, we have some hold and everything's kind of locked in there and all that. We don't think about any issues with grain. Anybody know what grain does if you get it wet?
Bands.
It does. Thank you, Bob. Absolutely. So imagine you have a ship that the bottom of your ship, where all the cargo is loaded as thick as you can with grain, because you got to make every ounce count in order to get paid. And that's dry grain. And now you're going to threaten it with getting wet. When ships got into bad weather that carried grain like this, it was not uncommon at all for the ship bow to actually crack and break apart because of the expansion of the grain. So that's a big fear, and that's why the captain is willing to move with the ship at all in the winter, is he wants to preserve his ship and his cargo. Otherwise, who cares? But so that's kind of what's going on here behind the scenes. So on to 13. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and they sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon, and I didn't see what this was in the, you'll have to tell me, Jeff, in the NIV, soon a tempestuous wind called the nor'easter struck down from the land.
A wind of hurricane force.
A wind of hurricane force. All right. So in the Greek, yep, where it says northeaster, that's literally, this is just a transliteration into English, basically. It is literally, it says northeaster, because that's telling you the direction the wind is coming from. But the word, so you had hurricane force winds. We have tempestuous winds here. It's literally, the Greek word is typhonos.
Oh. So
I think I'd say a typhoon.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So typhoon strength, wind and wave against ancient little Roman ship. Now they got sails, but they're also going to have, probably slaves or somebody else there helping to man some oars of some nature. neither of those is gonna do anything against typhoon winds. You're just praying and holding on at that point, and hoping that things don't get too bad too quick. So that's what happens in 15. When the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulties to secure the ship's boat. That would be its lifeboat. So they can't go into the wind, they can't go the direction they want, and so they are driven. If this is a nor'easter coming from the northeast, they're now being driven southwest, complete opposite way where they want to go. They hoist it up and they use supports to undergird the ship, and then fearing that they would run aground on the NIV here, or the ESV says the citrus, they lowered the gear and thus were driven along. Should have looked this up in the NIV too. What do you have there, Jeff? I'm just going to pull it up here. Then I don't have to keep asking you.
Same thing.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. This is one of the places where I don't always understand why they would not give you, like, why do we translate some of this so oddly, and how there's we add to or things. What they're talking about here is that they would run aground on the citrus is sandbars. They are worried about that around this island there are high places of sand, particularly in a storm. You can't see where those are, and they get created. So they're worried that in this area they're going to run aground, and so they lowered the gear. They drop an anchor. Okay, and we're driven around because of the anchor. So the anchor is trying to keep them at least in some area. And 18, since they were violently storm tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. So they start throwing things overboard, particularly the grain, at least some of it, because they know that if the grain gets too wet, they're going to not have a boat anymore. So this is a really bad situation, really bad. Reminds me of, Noah has a book on the Coast Guard, and there were two ships in, I want to say it was like 1950, 1953, something like that. There were two ships off the coast of, off the East Coast. I want to say kind of off of Massachusetts, but maybe a little north of there. But they two ships in the same storm. They're both 60 footers, and they both split apart halfway through, just down the middle of the hull. One half went this way, one half went that way. And so it just reminds me of that. That's the fear, is that you have these, 10, 13, 15 foot waves, and this boat, which is a fairly good sized boat, as we'll see, they are worried that it is just going to split right in half, and they're all going down with it. And so they begin to try and weigh anchor to keep themselves from getting stuck. And because if they get stuck, then it's just going to get pounded on the sides until it rolls over or is thrown over or is torn apart. And then they start tossing stuff out. And so this happens for a while. So then we get to 19. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle, that is its anchor, overboard with their own hands. So for 3 days, that's an awful long time. That's 72 hours. I just read I was reading my daily devotion. I think it was Thursday, that there was a pastor who had served in, I want to say, the Navy during World War II. And he had went through one of these kinds of storms. And he said, in the 72 hours, I learned that one cannot remain, terrified of the sea and seasick for 72 hours, but one can learn that they can be continuous in prayer. So anyway, they're on the ship. Paul probably doing what he can. Most certainly, Paul is praying. So on the third day, they throw the anchors over with their own hands. And when neither sun nor moon appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Whew, there it goes. And since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and have not set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss." All right. So certainly we see in the saints both examples of good things and of things maybe not to do. I'm not sure that this is the best move out of Paul at that moment.
He was tired.
And he was probably cranky. And he probably hadn't eaten either. So he was hangry. But nevertheless, nevertheless, the guardrails are not that high. They don't care if you get thrown off the ship, Paul.
Jonah got thrown over for less, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Jonah asked to be thrown over, though. All right, good. So, but Paul continues. He doesn't just poke the bear here. He continues here. Yet now I urge you, take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God. It will be exactly as I have told you." Okay. So Paul gets an angelic visitor, and he stands on that. Right? A little bit of "I told you so," but nevertheless, he gets around to the good news. No one's going to be lost. That's awesome if you believe him. If not, it sounds like the ramblings of a crazy man in the midst of a storm. 6 one, half dozen the other. Take your pick. Okay. We'll see who believes who here. 26. But we must run aground on some island. That's what he says. Okay. Paul here is seemingly given sailing advice by the angel. You're all going to be saved, but you got to make sure you beach the ship, because that's how you're going to be saved. So the very thing they were trying not to do, to get stuck on the bar, on the sand, and therefore possibly get pummeled, rolled, destroyed, that's the only way out. All right. You got to lose the ship. Sometimes in life, there is not a good way out. I mean, God's in control and he will get you where you need to go. Do not fear. But sometimes that means losing the ship. Sometimes that means walking through hell. It's not a fun thing to have to think about. And plenty of you have experienced plenty of those moments already. But we see here a wonderful example that God is in control, even in the midst of what should be a life-ending storm, even in the midst of having to do the very thing that we thought would kill us or destroy us or cause everything to be lost. God is in control. And even so, he is doing this so that his will would be done. And ultimately, that's what it means to have faith in him, is not to worry about what's best for us, but to do his will. All right, good. So this is just like a big, long scene here. So we're going to keep going for a while. But when the 14th night had come, so they have like 3 nights of just awful, awful storms. But now we're in the 2 weeks of storms. When the 14th night had come and we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that we were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. Okay, that's like 60 feet, something like that. A little further on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. All right, and fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. So what they're worried about is, again, getting stuck on these sandbars and getting rolled over. And some sailors were seeking, and as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow. What do you think of that? We got people abandoning ship. If we're near land, I'm leaving. Okay. Just to remind us though, all right, we kind of get this idea, right? Every man for himself. Big boat's going to go under. If I can escape on the little boat, right? Kind of Titanic, right? Women and children first, right? We'll get on the boat and maybe we'll survive. This is still in the middle of a typhonal storm, which I totally made up that word, but that's okay. It's still in the middle of a humongous storm. What kind of a ship is going to survive this storm?
Doesn't seem like a little one would.
No. How many of you were going to take a rowboat out in 8-foot waves?
No.
That's what they're doing.
Ding dongs.
Exactly. This is suicide. Right? They are so afraid that they are willing to commit suicide because it is better in their minds than to stay in the ship and face the death that's coming. So now remember, Paul said no one would die, right? That's what the angel promised. As long as they stay in the ship. They leave the ship, no promises there. And so verse 31, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Whoa. Now, this certainly sounds ominous. All right. Like these 12 guys who lowered themselves into a little rowboat of a ship, tossing out some anchors. If they don't get back here, everybody's going to die. All right. That sounds like it's certainly ominous, but almost, prophetic, maybe, like God's, almost like Samson, right? Don't cut your hair or you won't have power anymore, right? Keep all the guys on the ship or I won't keep anybody protected. It could be that, but some of the commentators, based on what we'll see in verse 37 there were 276 persons in the ship. They think that Paul is making a far more obvious statement. So kind of less divinely awe-inspiring as we would sit there. The commentators think that Paul is making the obvious observation that if they let even these 12 guys abandon the ship, there will simply not be enough crew to man the ship when the storm stops.
Well, also, if the 12 guys abandon the ship using the boat, there'll be no boat left.
Well, yeah, there'll be no boat left. That's certainly true. And these guys can't all swim. And so that's another bad issue. So the reason that 37 is important, we'll get to that in a moment here, is with 276 persons in the ship, Josephus, who's a historian we've referenced a few times, Jewish historian from this time period, he writes that the kind of ships that would have been holding Paul held at most 600 persons. So we are less than half of that, including the centurion, the entourage of the prisoners, and the prisoners. So we're probably talking a third of the ship is crewed for what it could be. So we are skeleton crew at this point, which leads me to kind of believe that Paul is making it more obvious, not a prophetic, we're all going to die. God's promises aren't going to be true if these guys leave, but a more obvious, if these guys leave, none of us know how to run the boat. And you need someone who knows how to run a big boat. Otherwise, the big boat doesn't go anywhere. So, all right. So 32. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. This is implying that the soldiers came back in and they cut the ropes of the boat after. So they didn't just abandon the guys out there, just kind of cut them loose. And as day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take food, saying, "Today is the 14th day, and you have been continuing in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore, I urge you, take some food. It will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all, that he broke it and began to eat. And then they were all encouraged, and they ate some food themselves. And there were 276 persons in the ship. What do you think of Paul's little food moment?
Kind of sounds like Jesus.
It does, doesn't it? Come, have something to eat. Yes, yes.
And he broke bread.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's been debate over the history of the church as to whether or not this is communion, right? And he took bread, he broke it, blessed it, gave it to those who were with him. The common consensus is this is not communion, but rather the fact that we want to read it that way really does affirm that even the simple activities of life are activities that that contain a liturgy, that contain a theology and express a faith that we have. I know Linda has read the book. I highly encourage you can borrow it from me at any point if you want to. Liturgies of the Ordinary, I think is what it's called. Now I'm spacing on the title, but I'm pretty sure that's what it's called.
Plural. I think it's singular, Liturgy of the Ordinary.
Okay, Liturgy of the Ordinary. The author there goes through just kind of daily moments of life and talks about how they can be basically imbued with or viewed through the theological lens of what the Lord teaches us and how he forms us through not only worship but scripture. And it can be a very helpful thing as we see our lives in that vein and in that light. So I think that's a good thing. We want to kind of look at it and say, that sounds like it could be the Lord's Supper. Well, maybe we ought to take a step back and say, how often do our meals look like they could be the Lord's Supper?
Mhm.
And that would be perhaps a lesson for us, that when we have the opportunity, whether it be guests or family, friends, neighbors, whatever it may be, that when we do take food, when we do come together for nourishment, that we do so in a way that, if the world wasn't sure, they would go, man, that looked religious. Right? Not just scarfing down a meal, perhaps over a lunch hour, but having a moment to be thankful and giving thanks to God for what has been given to us. So letting that just kind of be our faith expressed in a simple way of eating. Who knows, maybe you'll convert somebody by eating. Wouldn't that be a story to tell?
Have more meals with friends then.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good idea. All right, well, let's finish up this chapter. That'll leave us with 28 next week. And we'll have some other thoughts at the end of 28 as well then. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. And when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach, on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, and at the same time loosening the ropes that had tied the rudders, and then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, or really a sandbar, they ran the vessel aground, and the bow stuck, remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. Reef here, really not a good word. It is a sandbar. Literally, the Greek says in the place between two seas, it was stuck. So you can imagine exactly what that is. It's a sandbar that kind of separates two places. So the exact same thing that Paul said they had to do, the thing they'd been avoiding the whole time, right, of getting this thing stuck, because once it gets stuck, then all that wave action starts wrecking the boat, starts breaking it apart. At 42, the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to make for the land, and the rest on planks or pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. So the soldiers that are on this boat wanted to kill everybody because better to kill prisoners, even those who had appealed to Caesar, than have a prisoner get free. Right? Because you might get punished for killing a prisoner that was supposed to go to Caesar, but in the situation, probably not, or be a very minor punishment. If the soldier let a prisoner escape, that's punishable by death.
Mm.
So lesser of the two evils there. But the centurion, older, wiser guy, he takes care of Paul. Obviously saw something there, some wisdom there.
Pastor, when they threw the grain into the sea, were they trusting Paul that, you know, things are going to happen tomorrow? We're going
Yeah. Yeah. It seems that way. I mean, they wanted to, so one of the reasons they throw the wheat into the sea is it has started to get wet and they don't want it to blow up their ship. But they also want to get their ship then as high out of the water as they can, because they are trying to skirt over a sandbar or two. So that's their ultimate goal, is to be as dynamic in the water as they can be. Get as close to this as possible, knowing that most of them can't swim. So do you guys know, I love this image of people, you know, kind of coming in on planks and pieces of the ship. This is an image that Paul will use, actually. I believe it's Paul, uses, that we have made a shipwreck of our faith. Yep. And there's some allusion, it seems, to this kind of an event. And this is at least the idea, I think, the scriptural idea of what it means to have made a shipwreck of our faith. That our faith has been driven the absolute opposite way, right, than what we had intended. And now we are stuck and we're doomed. And how are we going to be saved then? By clinging to pieces of the ship as we come on in the land. And what wood do you cling to? You cling to the wood of the cross. And this is a beautiful image that has been used in much church art, that we who have made shipwrecks of our faith now grab hold of the ship, the wood that remains, which is the cross of Christ. And that holding on to that, we will arrive safely in land, which is our heavenly home. So there's a lot of imagery out there. I don't have any of it up on the computer to show you tonight, but it's there. There's a lot of literary comments that go, again, very similar way as well. And at least one or two moments in the New Testament, they use that same kind of language. Again, kind of bringing this to mind and bringing this then to us and how we might learn from this. So when everything's gone south, right? Don't get out of the boat. Do not listen to that stupid song, Get Out of the Boat and Walk on Water. All right? Because you ain't Peter. Stay in the boat. Because the boat is where God puts you. And when the boat gets broken, grab hold of what's left, which is Jesus. And he will take you through. I had a sermon on that once. Stay in the stupid boat.
Nice.
It was fun. I had a bunch of people who wanted to always do this weird innovation stuff. And they're always like, well, you got to have faith and you got to step out in faith. I'm like, no, Jesus told me to stay in the boat. Oh, God bless them. Those were good people. Anyway, they had to listen to a lot of bad sermons, far more than you guys. Like every one was terrible. You guys, it's just 2 out of 3. I know they're bad because they gave me video recordings of all of them. It broke my DVD player.
You ever take an old one and like rewrite it?
Yeah, every once in a while.
Say, oh yeah, I do this different.
Yeah, there's what I tend to do is if I'm going to use an old one, there's a couple that have stuck with me from either a core image or I really liked kind of how I did it. And those I will reuse on various occasions. So I know I've done it here, but the 5 fish or 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, 7 days a week, tell the story of a priest who finds people, and I don't have anything to preach on, but he's helping these people see the goodness of Christ in their daily lives. That was one. Another one was Jesus said, and it's for Psalm, I think it's Psalm 37, but it's about loss and about a grandpa who has just words of wisdom, basically just quoting the Psalm. Jesus said, I'll be with you always kind of moment for his grandson, his granddaughter, his wife, his son-in-law, his daughter-in-law, a few different things. And then they have a funeral service and they find the Psalm, kind of deal. So that was kind of a fun one. I did a Thanksgiving Eve one. So Thanksgiving Eve, Thanksgiving is a church service with no season. Okay, it is in a theological no man's land. Because just so everybody understands, the last Sunday of the church year and the first Sunday of Advent, all right, tend to be, okay, they revolve around November 30th. And so it tends to be that Thanksgiving, being the 4th Thursday of November, occurs somewhere in between these two events. And therefore, it does not exist in a season of the church year because the church year has ended and the church year has not begun.
Nice.
Yes. And so, but you get the same readings every year. That's the thing that really bothers me. So I don't know if you guys remember it. I think it was pre-COVID that I did it here. But I wanted to do, it's always the story of the lepers, the 10 lepers who are healed and the one who returns. Okay. And here you are in a service that has no church season, where everybody is busier than God knows what. Okay. And now we're going to preach on, well, I gave blessings to everybody. Where are the other people? Talk about preaching to the choir, right? I showed up. Like, come on, like just pat them on the back and send them home. I mean, that's really what we should do. Thank you for being here. God bless you. Go home. Pie is burning. That's really what we should do.
Can I do the sermon that night then?
You can. Yeah, you want it? You're in. Done. Let the record show.
You just did it. So yeah, we're perfect.
There you go.
It's written.
That's right. That's right. But so I wanted to play with this idea of who would the lepers be today, right? And this is where I learned from my previous secretary what I can and can't have Jesus do. So to give you just this, the way the story goes is basically it opens with finding this individual, this young man, day drinking in a gay bar. Okay, and he stumbles into the back alley. Now, I don't describe what he does in the back alley, but we all know what happens in the back alley. He's relieving himself, right? He's not. Don't go too dark there. And that's okay. And that's where Jesus meets him, is in the back alley. Now, I was going to have Jesus just standing at the edge of the alley, okay, smoking a cigarette. Because that seemed to be a perfect thing. But my secretary would not let me do that. She was dead set that Jesus would not smoke because it would be hurting himself. That was the bridge to Diane. Now I could have him drinking a beer because he drank wine and things. So he could be day drinking in the back alley outside of a bar, ill repute. But having him with a cigarette in his hand, that was a bridge too far. So
That's funny.
yeah. So moral of the story really was that Jesus pronounces the same thing, same hope. You're healed, right? Go in peace. And the guy goes, no way, goes to his clinic. He's healed, right? And so he ends up running back to the alley singing, Jesus loves me, this I know, falling down in worship outside, in the back alley once more before the Lord. So that's kind of how I wanted to do the telling, but that was where I learned Jesus can't smoke. Those are kind of the big ones. I've done a couple other ones. Kyrie was one that I did with you guys and with them.
You haven't been on a ladder.
I have not been on the ladder with you guys. No, I have thought about it once in a while, but I have not done the ladder with you guys. That would be a rewriting, because that part worked, but the rest of it didn't work very well. I don't think I've told you guys the Skittles story or the Starburst story. That was where my father caught me lying. That's a fun one to utilize. And because I was such an idiot. When you're lying, and your kid lies to you, and it's like the evidence is like literally right there. Like, no, I didn't do that.
Or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Really? You're gonna
Yeah.
stick with that one? Yeah. Okay.
You haven't used it in a sermon. You've at least told some people.
Okay. I think I know. I'm trying to think of
I'm like,
these.
that sounds familiar.
It does,
Yeah.
yeah, it does sound familiar.
Yeah, I've probably used that illustration then. I remember teaching on prayer right after Noah was born. This one I might have to bring back because we have some younger parents now. Again, we're teaching on prayer, and I was trying to impress upon people the necessity of prayer, even though it feels so impressive, right? That our prayers should be for our kids should be these great and glorious things, right? We should be building cathedrals of prayer for them. That they would have a beautiful spouse and a wonderful family come, that they, in their future, and that they would do well and the Lord will bless them and all these things, right? And it's just overwhelming, right? And because it feels so overwhelming, we often just don't do it. So I told the story of trying to rock Noah to sleep. Okay. You've all been there, right? And so I was like, I had this realization of trying to pray while I was doing this, like, Lord, I know I should be praying for all these big things, all these great things, but Lord, all I really want right now is for you just to make him go to sleep.
Amen.
My arms are tired.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
want to put them down.
Or I'm tired.
Exactly.
That too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, those are the ones that kind of really stick out to me. I've done a few others that I've looked at and redone. Some of them, oof. I will say I may not be the smartest tool in the shed, but after a couple of the first sermons, that's when I went to the church I was at and said, I would like to do more education because I need it. So, and I did. I absolutely did. I don't know where I would be in terms of preaching if it wasn't for going back to school with that. That was incredibly helpful. But yeah,
Probably when you go back and have that background done, it
Yeah.
probably helps. Now you know what you're looking for.
yeah. I think the thing that was the hardest thing of anything. All right.